So in a classic speakeasy sort of mixtape effect, we're going to go from flat earth to flat bush. Xochitl Gonzalez is a contributor to The Atlantic and her weekly newsletter, Brooklyn Everywhere, thank you everyone, explores gentrification of people and places. Her New York Times bestselling debut novel is called Olga Dies Dreaming, was published earlier this year. Prior to beginning her MFA, she was an entrepreneur and strategic consultant for nearly 15 years. And she's written, in her own words, I tend to find inspiration from real-life events, Hurricane Maria, real-life crimes. Both my abandoned ship novel, which we now all want to read, and my next novel are based on 2 real-life deaths. And my writing style is much more immersive. I'm inclined to write for hours and hours in my pajamas, and ideally for days at a time, and then to sit and do little chunks every day. So here, not in her pajamas, Xochitl Gonzalez, welcome.
Hi, oh my gosh, she was taller than me. Everyone's taller than me. Okay, so I wrote this novel, Olga Dies Dreaming, and it's about a lot of things. It's about gentrification, it's about corruption, it's about identity, Puerto Rico colonialism, but it focuses on a middle-aged wedding planner who services the ultra-rich named Olga, and that was partially inspired by my past career as a wedding planner. And though it goes into all these other things, it starts with a riff about rich people and napkins. And 100% of the time, no matter what people want to talk to me about, they always also want to talk about the napkins. So I thought in the theme of Behind Closed Doors, I would tell you all the real story about that anecdote that starts my novel. And it is a tale of class, of lies, deception, and small-town New York. Obviously, being a wedding planner involves dealing with a lot of batshit crazy people, and this was about 2009, and I remember because it was the end of the recession, and I was broke, and I was also in the middle of, I was ending a divorce and trying to start dating again. And the phone rings, and nothing good starts, and the woman starts whispering, my daughter's getting married in a few weeks, you've got to save this wedding. And she refused to tell us any more details and insisted that we come up to her apartment because only then could we understand what was really going to happen and why this was such a conundrum. And so, I was broke, so I went, and she ends the call and goes, by the way, I'm very, very rich. And she was, because when we got to her apartment, it was like this giant old-fashioned building on Park Avenue, apartment building, and you walk in the lobby, and the doorman opens the door, and there's only 2 elevator banks, and each elevator opens into its own apartment. And so we go in, and the maid in the maid outfit greets us, and there's literally like French Impressionist paintings on the wall, and we're escorted into the library to meet the mother of the bride. We're just gonna call her Mia for the sake of convenience. And Mia's waiting there, and she explains that this is absolutely dire. Her daughter is embarrassed of all of this, and not the library or the maid per se, but of being rich. And she has basically been living as a closeted rich person her entire adult life. And none of her friends know that she's rich. She has been living in squalor, Mia tells us, rejecting all of Mia's fineries, her clothes. She's walking around in Old Navy. It's a nightmare, and the cross that poor Mia has to bear. And now they finally come to the moment of truth because last year, Mia's other daughter got married at a giant wedding at the Pierre. And Mia covered the room in orchids. And when her next daughter got engaged, realized that she can't let her mother have anything to do with this, otherwise everyone's gonna understand that the jig is up. She's actually rich. And so she insists upon taking Mia's checkbook and planning the wedding herself. And so we get a few weeks out, and finally Mia goes to the tasting, she sees the venue, and realizes that this is a piece of shit. And she's like, I can't have my friends and family come to this. And so they get into a giant fight and agree that they're gonna hire a wedding planner, but the only wedding planner that they could decide upon concurrently was my company. And somehow or another, we used to shift batshit, and it was like I chose this batshit. And so it became me. And I have to tell you, when I got into it, Mia says, listen, the reason why you're here is because before you meet my daughter, you need to understand how it's gonna work. And it's gonna work like this. You just say yes to everything she says, and if she brings up the cost, you pretend that it's already included in the contract, and then secretly, you and I are going to plan the wedding I want. And that meant upgrading everything, the food, the drinks, all of it. And I would have felt weird about this, except that her daughter really had terrible taste. And Mia was kind of a riot and also very obsessed with my love life. And at the time, I had just met this guy who was seemingly very charming. I'd never online dated. I'd been with my ex-husband for 10 years. I'd never online dated. He was so charming. He had the thing that I liked. He had a great job. And the thing that I liked most at the time, which was he had a sadness about him. I don't know why I needed that. And it turns out that the sadness was really, really sad. Like, I mean, he and his ex-wife had tried to have kids for years and all this IVF, and it never worked, and they finally got pregnant, and then she ends up having a miscarriage, and it's just too much, and instead of bringing them together, it tears them apart, and now he's in the midst of this divorce. And I just ate it up. You know, I was like all in, and I would tell Mia all about the developments of our relationship, and, you know, she would come up with these reasons for meetings, and I would go, and we would end up having 3 bottles of wine, and the next thing you know, there we are. And everything was great until then everything was terrible because her daughter decides that she wants to reduce the footprint, the carbon footprint of the wedding, and she needs the escort cards to be edible so that we're not wasting anything. And she has the idea, the escort card, by the way, is the thing that tells you what table to sit at. And she has the idea that we're going to serve bacon-wrapped dates with a toothpick in them and a little tag that tells you your name and your table that you're going to sit at. And I say yes, like I'm supposed to, and it's like, oh, that's a great idea. And then immediately everybody leaves, and I email Mia, and I said, it's going to look like a table of floating turds. What are we going to do? And Mia goes, for fuck's sake, I wish you were my daughter. Now, they say that there's no accidents, but Mia forgot to sign out of her Gmail, and her daughter logged onto the computer and saw the correspondence, and obviously insists that I get fired immediately, as one would expect, except that Mia couldn't quit me. And so instead we developed this elaborate ruse where one of the part-time workers that worked for our company we made her pose as an employee of the caterer. It was going to be her point person, and she starts meeting with the daughter, but nothing that happens between them makes any sense because the only thing that really matters is what happens between me and Mia. And we keep planning this very, very lavish wedding. And so we keep going, we keep going. And in the meantime, I'm going out with this guy, and the divorce is starting to sound complicated. And I start to feel like I'm fucking this married guy. And I was like, this doesn't feel good. And so, I was like, you know what? Why don't you call me when things settle down? There was like real estate involved and a soft real estate. By the way, only in New York do you get somebody saying like, the real estate market is so soft. That's why my divorce isn't going well. And you accept that as like an honest answer. And I was like, you know what? I think you should call me when things settle down and if the time is right. I was so zen at the time, right? And it was hard because I knew he was kind of rich. He'd mentioned a prep school. He told me he'd gotten married at the plaza. Like, I obviously could put 2 and 2 together. And Mia had been cheering the whole thing on. She was like, marry rich, it's so fun, it's so fun. So a few days after this breakup of sorts, Mia calls me desperate. She's like, we've got to talk about the napkins. The wedding's 3 weeks away, and we've not talked about these napkins. She's like, please, you need to meet me at the Upper East Side at this linen store, and then we can have lunch. And so we go, and we persnickety about these napkins for forever. And then finally have this lunch, and 2 bottles of wine are consumed, and she's asking about the guy, and I explained to her what happened. And all of a sudden, I have this memory. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe, Mia, I never told you he went to the same prep school as the girls went to. I can't believe I never thought of that. I wonder if you know him. Know him. Does she know him? The elevators? She's on 17 North. His parents live in 17 South. She was at the wedding. She was at the 6-year-old son's bris. She was at his parents' house the weekend before in the Hamptons with the wife and the kid. There was no divorce. There was no miscarriage. There was no IVF. There was nothing except for him actually being a horrible person, which, by the way, at this point, I'm not sure that Mia and I aren't, because we're still going behind her daughter's back to plan the wedding. And so the day of the wedding comes, we've got like 5 staff members there dressed as waiters, but very nice looking waiters because Mia didn't like the normal uniform as we upgraded, obviously. And I am stationed at a restaurant 3 blocks away, calling in instructions to the staff and fielding Mia's hysterical text. I know she's going to find out what we've been doing. I know she's going to find out what we've been doing. I did not know the reason why she was going to find out what we were doing was because Mia was going to get drunk and tell her. And she eventually, before the end of the wedding is over, confesses the entire scheme. And as you can imagine, the daughter now I already thought I'd been fired and is now like, I forbid you from ever talking to her again. I don't want you to see her. I don't want you to talk to her. I don't want you to email her. And Mia acquiesces, agrees to family therapy, and from time to time still emails me. Thank you very much.